Okay, so as you were kind of talking about the finely tuned design of the universe, rather than thinking in a more cosmological perspective, as scientists are prone to do,
Yeah.
I kind of thought of it more of like a biological function, because in some ways, the cosmos reflects our bodily functions. Something fails in our bodies,
Right.
one of two things happens: it all fails, or it compensates and continues. But when you were talking about the like the finely tuned, like almost perfect, not want to say perfect, that's maybe a bit of an exaggeration, but you're talking about the blueprint. And what I'm thinking is, over time, we as Homo sapiens, because we are technically apart from Homo neanderthalensis and Homo erectus and so on and so forth, we've changed in some ways. Some of us are lactose intolerant. Some of us have appendicitis or appendix bursts, and some of us still have or don't no longer have our wisdom teeth. So these were part of the blueprint from the very beginning, and yet over time we've figured out how to function without them. So my question is, if God created us humans with these parts in mind, or these things in mind, these functions in mind, if we're removing them or altering those functions, like taking out the appendix, the wisdom teeth, developing or not developing lactose intolerance, for example, can someone make the argument that we're moving away from God, that we're becoming our own thing?
Yeah, and that might be more like in the realm of like bioethics. I think that might be another conversation. I'm not a bioethicist. But I think that something that's interesting is that so much of parts of biology that for so long have been thought to be functionless, like may have no purpose for us today, such as the appendix, that there's some research that seems to indicate that they actually do perform functions. Like another one is junk DNA. For so long it was thought to not perform anything. It's just kind of leftover junk in our genetics that doesn't do anything. And so it brings many to doubt, maybe we're not the product of intelligence. Why does so much of our DNA not do anything? But where some research indicates that actually it does perform really important aspects of life. And like just because we can live without something doesn't mean that it doesn't accomplish anything. Like I can live without both my arms and my legs. Doesn't mean that they don't do anything. So that doesn't mean that we have an answer for what everything does or what the function is. But I think that there's definitely a potential for a future in research in those areas, that perhaps there is function in these things that we thought maybe are just kind of left over from the past. Does that make sense?
Right.
Yeah.
But the removal of limbs, going back to that conversation, in some ways they're external. But I'm talking about the internal. We were born with the wisdom teeth to develop. We were born with an appendix to develop. We're talking about body parts or things written in our code that were meant to enact or behave in certain ways. But over time, we no longer have a use for the appendix or the wisdom teeth. Now they crowd our teeth and causes toothaches more than anything else. They're more of a problem than they were 10, 20, 30,000 years ago. So that's where I'm coming from.
Your question was, are we moving away from God's design?
Right, because for me, the argument is, or what I'm trying to argue is, we were born with these things.
Right.
And yet, as we grow and mature, we are essentially modifying ourselves. Whereas when you talk about removal of limbs, those are external circumstances, an accident, or there are some genetic defects like fetal alcohol syndrome that can influence the appearance of the body. But I'm talking about things that we were inherently born with. Like all humans are going to have an appendix. It just depends on their life choices whether it bursts or not. Same thing with wisdom teeth. We were born with wisdom teeth, but depending on how our jaw is formed, it either crowds our teeth and causes toothache, or they can coexist within the rest of the jaw and not cause any problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, that stuff changes over time. I'm not sure if this can answer your question, but kind of want to lean into this because someone else might be thinking this and I want to ask it. But like, what about bad design? What about examples of things that we would, from a human perspective, say is bad design? Maybe like the appendix or wisdom teeth or panda's thumb, whatever it is. Bad design doesn't bring us to think that there's no design. There's a world of difference between bad design and no design. I think that the Christian is left with questions as to structures that maybe we don't understand, structures that seem harmful. But so for us, in a way of saying, like, sure, the panda's thumb may be a problem for us, but the atheist has a much bigger problem. Their problem's the panda, you know? So I think that even though there might be examples of design that we can't understand, that we might call bad design, the fact is that that is dwarfed by the amount of stunning design that we find in the world. And I think that even within a Christian worldview, we recognize the curse of creation, we recognize sin and how that's affected not just our souls, but the creation and how bodies fall apart, you know, stuff changes. I think that gives room for maybe how certain order functions could be degraded over time. So maybe wisdom teeth weren't what they are today. Maybe the appendix wasn't what it is today. Perhaps that used to function better, but now, you know, because of randomness and degraded order and function, kind of like we talked about, as a result of mutation, that maybe what we have today isn't what we originally had.
Right.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.